Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds, in under 30 times that I gotta kill that darn lurking Skaven.
To dodge!
I'm Phil, and with me, as always, is my co-host Davey. How are you doing, Davey?
I'm doing outstanding.
Outstanding. All right. And joining us today to talk some about these rapacious rats is the man who ran them so well at Adepticon recently. We got Requizen here. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to have you. We really wanted to sort of dig into why rats, but just to give folks a little bit of context before we dive into the deck, which is the main topic for our episode today. We just wanted to say our normal context for this episode, so folks know when we're recording here. We're still waiting on the Exiled Dead. Haven't gotten any more news about them. We just today got some sort of a teaser about a new season or a new... Maybe it's just the new core box. It's kind of hard to say whether it's a transition to a new season or not, but there's this weird egg skull thing.
Yeah, a little creepy, right?
Yeah.
A little teaser for a teaser. It's like tune in tomorrow. So
yeah, right.
Of course, we're
Announcement
recording.
of an announcement.
Yeah, exactly.
Build that hype.
If we could push the recording like 11 hours, we'd probably be able to talk a little more about it. But that's for another day.
Yeah. We'll get to that one next time. But
Next episode.
Definitely been getting out the tinfoil hats in the Discord for that one. So, maybe some reason to come and talk some ideas there with us. And then the only other thing is that we recently saw a new Rivals deck in a White Dwarf. This is the Maze Breachers deck, and it is basically just a mishmash of the... What is this one? It's a couple different things, right?
It comes out of the Harrow Deep core and out of Black Powders. So the universals from those combined.
Yep.
Okay. I wasn't sure if there was more in there as well, but yeah, so just the two. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I'm glad they're doing it, honestly. I mean, my point that I've been saying is that I think Rivals is a good format idea, but you need more decks to make it a viable thing, especially with how oppressive Essentials is. And it'll be much easier to phase out Essentials if you have more decks and, more options for people to play with.
Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with Rivals Plus, because I've actually explained that a couple times as this came out. Phil, can you run that by real quick? Rivals Plus, that is.
Yeah, and I guess it's also worth noting, I think at Warhammer World, are they calling it Warlords? Is that right? I feel like I've seen that a couple of times.
Warlords is what some of the playtesters have been calling it. I mean, I think maybe that was kind of an internal name that's kind of got disseminated, but I don't think it's ever used in like a official thing anywhere.
All right. Well, I've certainly seen it on the internet. So
yeah.
Maybe people will say Rivals Plus, maybe people will say Warlords. I usually see Rivals Plus, but the basic idea is that it's Rivals, so you're playing a single faction. You don't have access to all the cards, but instead of it just being like, I'm just playing Hrothgorn, instead you can then say, I either want to use one of the pre-constructed Rivals decks, or you can take the faction cards combined with one of the other Rivals features. So either the pre-constructed Rivals decks, which we have the, I'm not going to remember, Silent Menace and...
Illusory Might.
Illusory Might. Man, those names. And then also right now, as Requizen was mentioning, they do allow for the Essentials pack to be one of the things that you can sort of shuffle in there as well, which right now I feel like a lot of people are just choosing that because it has a lot of very good options because it's supposed to, right? But it sort of skews this format.
Yeah, a big thing is just that like there's no plus damage cards in any of the Rivals decks, so Essentials has great strength and Glory Seeker and Fighter's Ferocity and a couple of good weapons. So it's and great Fortitude as well. So
yeah, lots of very strong options.
Yeah, really tough to pass up. it makes sense to me as having it in there. I know a lot of people talk about rotating it out or phasing it out, and I don't disagree. But as a format that's designed to to be like a stepping stone, you want to encourage new players. Hey, you know what you should buy is Essentials. That's really going to help you out in championship play. So it'll be tough to phase it out, but I think to your point, Zach, I think like more options out there. Like if there are more Rivals decks to potentially compete with it, then you have the chance of making some tougher decisions.
Yeah, well, especially with how good this deck is. I mean, I know we're not the point of this episode. We're not going to get into it, but this has Contest of Equals and Shadow Keeper, which is a restricted card and a card which should be restricted, among a bunch of other really good cards. So I think this is one that you might see people start using.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Should be interesting. But yeah, that was just a quick little segue to try and get us into our main topic. Sure. But I guess I don't want to spend a ton of time off the main topic, but we do have our normal community shout outs and our what the heck is going on with you segment. So David, you want to just quick rundown? We've got a few tournaments to just let people know about.
Yeah, sure.
And so just run them down quick.
So Set the Tempo's former Cruel Overlord, Matt, is setting up the Alberta Grand Clash. It's on May 15th. Look into it if you can. It's a cool group of folks. There's going to be Captain Murder is his handle online. I know he's part of that crew. I'm looking at it. Seems really unlikely that I'll be able to pull it off, but man, it would be kind of amazing. It's a one-day clash, but if you can make it for the day prior, they'll have another event there to make it worth your while. Ourselves, we are having a local here, just a little mini thing, but it's May 1st, starting at 11 a.m. in Pegasus Games in Madison, Wisconsin. We're going to do a Rivals Plus event. Our crew here has been focusing on in the aftermath of Adepticon. We're super stoked, pumped up, and we want to keep growing our community and bring even more people next time. And to that point, actually, Skylar's hosting a new player event tonight. As we record this, it's going on. They've built a bunch of decks, laid out a bunch of snacks, and got a bunch of people who've been interested. I think they have 4 or 5 new players that have awesome. Dipped their toe in at some point or have expressed interest, and they're hoping to big up the game a little bit more. So we want to lean into that, and that's why we're going Rivals Plus. We're reaching out to some of the neighboring regions like Chicago and Rockford and Milwaukee, see if we can pull some folks in, and if we get anybody, awesome, and if we just grow it locally, awesome, and if we just play Rivals Plus with the people we already know, that also is going to be fun. So May 1st, we'll have by the time this airs, we're going to have the details up on our site. There'll be a link in the show notes, and check it out. Yeah. Other community shout outs. So you've heard Phil and I run through our games. If you want to hear Zach or Amon's games, you can listen to Path to Glory's most recent episode. At the time of this, they run down those. And then Gerard, who ran Morn Flight to Frightening Effect, he's got an article on Set the Tempo where they kind of break down his deck and a lot about how he put it together and how he put it into play. And that's a really good read. Set the Tempo, real solid. So, Zach, I've kind of grabbed up all the big bits. You got anything else community wise that I might have missed here?
Not off the top of my head. New Vassal League is starting soon. Signups are closed now, but I think it'll be interesting to follow that. And thanks to everybody who's making that happen. All the Vassalites who make that. It kind of kept us sane through lockdown with these leagues and tournaments and stuff. So shout out to them.
Phil, anything for me?
No, I think you ran down everything that I've seen posted recently. So
dominated. I'm going to call that a win for me.
Yeah. Mark that one in the W column. All right, and then quickly we'll run through our hobby segment. What the heck is going on with you? Zach, you got anything that you've been hobbying on?
Been taking a small break from Underworlds. I've got a kill team on the table. I got some Vet Guard and some Wormblade on the table. And I just actually finished building my first 3D printer. So I'm going to be printing out some terrain. And I saw, I don't know if you guys saw it. I think it was on the Discord. There was at one of the Warhammer World events, there was like somebody printed out a border for their boards, so like no matter the setup, it gave like a little bit of terrain and stuff. And like people have printed up stuff for blocked hexes before, but I thought that was really cool, and I'm gonna see if I can find a design for that I like.
Cool,
nice. How about you, Davey?
I've been putting some paint on Thundrix Profiteers. They're a warband that I had undercoated but not done anything with for a while. I've got a KO army actually I added up. I was like curious how much I had in the current edition. I have exactly 1,000 points.
Perfect.
So it's a nice way to dip back into that color scheme. I was going to get some paint on the Kainan crew, but the weather's been kind of up and down, rainy on the days where I could have gotten that first spray coat on, so that got disrupted. And of course got out for our Thursday night where I got lost to Sepulchral Guard. I was trying my championship Farstriders.
Ooh.
And I would say it was Claim the City. I tried to block it and he scored it, but really it was Kainan Scimitar just chopping up all my dudes.
Oh wow.
It felt terrible.
Not even a weapon that you've heard of before. Off brand.
I mean, 3 Fury often having supports, cleave, reroll if you don't get anything. Kept on putting me on crits and it felt real bad.
It's a good one. I don't see it used as much as it probably should be, but yeah, that's pretty rough, man.
But it was good. And then a little bit of the deck I always bring for if somebody wants to play Rivals or Rivals Plus is I always just bring Blade Coven with their straight Rivals deck, which is insane because there's like some great cards and some awful cards in that
Bold
deck.
choice.
Yeah.
They're one of the rougher Rivals decks for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's some gold in there, but there's also that like, okay, well, I can move through occupied and lethal hexes unless I'm like, what is this card? Can I just discard it right now so I don't have to look at it anymore? So what about you, Phil?
So I've sort of gone back to the drawing board a bit. Started working on my after seeing that no one played the Seraphon at all at Adepticon, I was
hurt your heart a little bit. Yeah.
Hurt me. So I picked them back up, tried them out, not at our last local game night, but the week before. Played them into Skylar's Adepticon deck and went 1-1. So that felt pretty good.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to keep tinkering with that, see how it goes. And then I really do want to putz around with Black Powder some more. I don't feel like I gave him a fair shake, but I don't know. It's just so much. It feels like so much work every time I think about it, but I'm just like, do I really want to do this? And then I don't. So maybe someday. We'll see. But yeah, that's what's been going on with me. And I believe now we can get down to business talking about this deck that you built.
Sounds awesome. For anyone who's listening along, I encourage you, head to Underworlds DB. You can find a copy of this deck. I'll have it linked in the show notes, but it's probably just easier for you to go straight there. It's listed in the Adepticon decks. You'll find the Skaven deck up there, the number 4?
Number 4. Yep.
Yeah. Quite. I mean, to say anything of secondary scoring, I mean, we'll make it clear, and for folks who have already listened to Path of Glory, they would know, but you were playing in the final match. Obviously didn't end up winning it out, unfortunately, but having to fall all the way to 4th.
Yeah.
Well, you can thank Davey for that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was like, and to
our
no
match
thanks,
wasn't
my
so
co-host.
rough. Yeah.
Yeah. I lost with a positive glory differential, which felt felt good going into the last round. But for me, already having a loss, I was like, that last round, it took me, I already said this, but it took me a while to realize, like, whoa, this matters a whole lot, because I could be anywhere from like 10th to apparently second. But I don't know how you feel about it, Zach, but if it was up to me, I'd probably trade that trophy for having been able to say I made it to the finals. People by trophy, I mean the second place thing I got to bring home, like just having a shot at that number one. It's got to feel good to have been there with the chance, even if you tiebreakers in the format meant you came away without an actual physical thing to hold.
Yeah, no, I think the experience was great. Like, I've never been on a top table like that for Underworlds. I've been a competitor for like 40K and AOS for a long time, and I've brought home trophies for Sigmar.
Sure.
But this is my first time for Underworlds, and I don't know, maybe it's just like the way the game's played or how seriously I take it, but like being at that top table feels much more intense and much more exciting. So it was a great experience. I mean, yeah, it sucks to, get all that way, only drop a handful of game, only really lose 2 games on the way up, and then not get anything. But I think in the long run, like, my Adepticon experience was great, and I don't need a piece of glass to tell me that. So
sure,
definitely.
Yeah. Actually, you were telling us you were tantalizingly close to the finals table back in 2019. I didn't realize this until we were chatting just now, but you were third in 2019 . So
yeah, got the runner up prize there, but that was before they started really doing day 2 cuts and stuff like that. So it was a different time.
Yeah,
that tournament went until 9 p.m. or something.
Did it really?
That one was rough. All right. So, Zach, we've got your Spiteclaw Swarm Mad Scientist brew here. What's in here? What's the secret sauce? Could you just run down the cards that you've got in here for us?
Sure. So, as always, start with our objectives. On the Surge side, we've got Everything to Prove, Fleeting Primacy, Moment of Glory, Prize Beyond Measure, Horrors in the Dark, and Reckless Swing. We have 7 end phase objectives. We have Dominant Position, Scant Resources, Making a Statement, Path to Victory, Fearless Seekers, Lengthening Shadows, and Sinking Feeling. On the Gambit side of things, all ploys, obviously. We've got Scratching in the Shadows, There Are Always More, Carnivores All, highlight of the deck.
Yeah.
Heated Instinct, Confusion, Sidestep, and then A Good Death, Dark Sacrifice, Omega's Offering, and Shadow Lure. Upgrades, we've got Extruded Snare, Impressive Bulk, Glory Seeker, Great Fortitude, Great Strength, Dying Curse, Screaming Demise, Gifted Bulk, Shadow Keeper, and Expendable.
So we know that this deck is awesome because we get to face it. But for all those folks out there who haven't seen this yet, haven't played against it, we wanted to just dive in here, really dig into sort of the meat of this deck and some of like why rats, like this season 1 sort of out of left field deck. Anything in particular? Any like specific cards or anything that sort of gave you the idea?
Well, really, this deck actually started as I was jumping between Grimwatch and Starblood Stalkers. Talked a little bit about this on Path to Glory, but I started playing those because I like swarmy warbands. I played Skeletons in Season 1 and Rats in Season 1. I played Thorns. I played Grimwatch. It's kind of like my style. I like a lot of models, and I like resurrecting models. And, in a lot of those decks, I was running Dying Curse because it's a really good card. I mean, you put out a guy that maybe you can res, or at the very least is somebody you don't care about losing, like a Talk in Starblood Stalkers or something like that.
For folks who don't know, Dying Curse, give that a quick rundown.
Yeah, Dying Curse is reaction: when this fighter dies, you give the attacker -2 to their wounds characteristic. And since it's -2 minimum of 1, of course, so you can't just like kill a 2-wound fighter. But since it's a -2 wounds characteristic, if they already have wounds on them, it can kill them. Say they have 2 wounds on a 4-wound fighter, you reduce them to 2 by 2 to 2 wounds, and now they're a 2-wound fighter, 2 wound counters, they just die. Or at the very least, you soften them up, and then Scritch can just run up and stab them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a very good card that I was running for a long time. And then I played a game against I can't remember who it was online, but I played against somebody playing Skeletons, and he played Screaming Demise against me, and I had to reread it because originally I thought it was when, it's the card reads reaction: when this fighter dies, choose an enemy fighter, give them a charge token. And I read that initially as, give a charge token to the fighter who kills you. I thought it was the same as Screaming Curse, and they're like, no, it can be any fighter on the board. And that's very powerful. So then I kind of I started digging into Arena Mortis 2, and I'm like, hey, there's a lot of cards in here that kind of give you bonuses for dying. So I was running those in Grimwatch, who also have res and also have expendable fighters. But one thing Grimwatch don't have is, one, a good Inspire condition. They have the worst Inspire condition in the game. I hate it so much. And 2,
bold statement, worst in the game. But certainly in Harrow Deep, I buy it in Harrow Deep, where everyone's trying to rush your territory at this point.
Yeah, I'm a little hyperbolic, but I think that I played them a lot in the last season of Vassal, and I think I inspired them in maybe 25% of my games. It's not reliable at all. Yeah, like you said, with the way the metagame is, and just they've changed how offset boards are. It's harder to longboard. It's it's also less reliable to stay in your territory because you can't place on edge hexes, so it's harder to guarantee you have 3 in your territory. So there's a lot that goes into making it a lot less reliable.
To be clear, I'm with you. I brought these guys for 7 or 8 games to our local, and I won my first one. I was like, all right, I'm onto something. I just lost nonstop after that. So
I don't think they're bad because they still have good cards, but man, if they shut down that Inspire round 1, their fighters are just not good uninspired.
Not so good. Yeah.
But anyway, so I was playing them, and I'm like, it's just kind of missing something. It's missing a little bit of spice. And then I was like, oh, who has another good card that happens when you die is Skaven. They have Expendable. Expendable is a really good card.
Sure do. Yeah.
And if you don't know what Expendable is, for the listeners, because they are Season 1 Warband, Expendable is, this fighter is not worth glory. Basically, it's a reaction: when you would be dealt damage, you just take the fighter off the board, deal 1 damage to the attacker, and they don't get glory. And it's not counted as taken out of action, so you can't score anything you take a fighter out of action as a surge or anything like that. It doesn't give primacy, nothing. It just counts as a failed attack even. I think the attack action fails. Or maybe it's succeeds, but you don't get the bounty. It's something like that. It's weird. They've had to FAQ it 4 times.
I'm pretty sure it fails because the reaction is during an attack that would cause any damage. You then remove the fighter from the battlefield, so the attack never actually succeeds.
Right. And this was, if you played a lot in mid Beastgrave, this was really bad with Crown of Avarice. If you guys remember that card.
Bad is one interpretation.
Insert PTSD meme here.
It was a really fun time for everybody involved, and there was no trauma had by anybody.
No.
But yeah, so I was like, oh yeah, and they have a good res. Skaven get to res on any starting hex anywhere on the board. And then I'm like, oh, they're also 2 dodge, and there's a lot of cover in the game. And they're also move 5, and a lot of the aggro things are either move 3 or move 4. And then I just started going through it and putting the deck together, and I was like, actually, this is... my original version of the deck was called Skaven Death Jank, because I thought it was just the jankiest thing in the world. And then I was like, this is actually I won all my test games when I was testing this out online and with friends in person. I was like, I don't know if I'm getting incredibly lucky or this is actually good, but then it just kind of kept happening. So that's how we ended up there.
The impression from looking at the deck, which funny enough, Davey, how did we find out about this deck?
So I've plugged the Discords a number of times, but you'd posted up there, and I remember you describing it as Death Jank, and I remember looking at it being like, oh, I don't know, this might have legs. And I built a much, much worse Skaven deck for our buddy Aaron. And then it was real close to the event. He says, hey, I can't find that. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I even saved it. Let me go find something. So I went and found a version of this that you had posted, handed it to him. And Aaron, who has not played in 2.5 years, went to Adepticon and won a match and tied another match out of the 4 he played with this.
Impressive.
So,
yeah. Good for him.
So basically, he went 500 at Adepticon with a deck that he'd never really looked at before.
And Adepticon was a rough field too. I mean, that was not an easy field to play into.
No, looking at this deck, it looked very good just on paper. So, and I can attest to having played against it
so
multiple
say we
times. It's a very, very good deck. But it's constructed in a slightly different way than most decks. Your deck has 13 objectives. Why?
Theme points.
What are you doing there?
There's a lot of end phases in here that you just can't guarantee. I have Making a Statement in here, and while I did score it a lot at Adepticon, it's just a card that sometimes you're going to have to throw away, Mm-hmm. And with the way the mulligan system nowadays is nice in that you get your initial cards back in your deck, but it does mean that getting to the bottom of that deck and seeing the cards you need to see is harder. So if you're not scoring surges quickly, like your surges are at the bottom of your deck, and you don't have the activations to cycle an objective because you're doing other things, sometimes you just need to throw away objectives at the end of the round that you're not going to score. Making a Statement is one. Fearless Seekers early on is another, or Lengthening Shadows early on is another one. Fearless Seekers can be one too if your opponents are really going for it. I threw Path to Victory out a lot because when you play into big meatball things like
would do that?
or Crushes, and you're like, well, I'm not going to kill anybody with 5 wounds, so Path to Victory is kind of worthless. So having that just one extra card in there to kind of be like, okay, I can safely throw away an objective and not really worry about my glory totally taking a hit. I think it ended up being pretty consistent for me. So it does make your surges come out a little bit slower just because there is that percentage of drawing a surge as opposed to an end phase goes in the wrong direction. But I think it evens out for the better.
Yeah. Well, it certainly seems to work very well for you. I think looking at it myself, it's like, it just feels like right now, everything that is in the meta actually just lends itself very well to Skaven just because they can resurrect an enemy territory. Was that sort of the idea with the objective deck? Because a lot of the things that you want to do involve holding objectives in enemy territory?
Yeah, actually, that was one of the things, again, during my time testing with Stalkers and Grimwatch, I found that a lot of times you were just running a dude into enemy territory to squat on a cover hex or on a delved objective. And that does, like we said, it works great for Skaven because Lurking Skaven starts out on 2 dodge. Everyone else gets to 2 dodge or 2 shield when they inspire. So getting them out there and just, you can put them out there, they can die, they can res into enemy territory. I've got a bunch of side steps to get back onto objectives after resing. Their res lends itself. There was actually during Dire Chasm, a somewhat popular Skaven deck that had a very similar idea. You just would resonate, or was it Dire Chasm or late Beastgrave? It was when Crown of Avarice was in. Because you would do the same thing. You would die, res an enemy territory. Okay, now I'm not worth any glory. I'm going to sidestep onto this objective. I'm going to pull this objective under me. I'm going to, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it just kind of won based off that.
Yeah. Restless Prize being a big help there where you could pull a objective onto a starter. Right?
Yeah, Restless was great. There were a couple other ones. One that I didn't include in here is I'm gonna blank on the name. It's the one where you pick a feature
Shifting
token.
shards or
Shifting shards is one, but there's another one where it's you just choose a feature token within 1 hex of a fighter and move it underneath them.
Oh, living lands is rotated out.
Symbiote's Call. Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
Symbiote's Call. I didn't choose that because Shadow Lure does something very similar, but it chooses the fighter, so you can also inspire off of it.
That's pretty smart.
And that's the other thing about Skaven is that they all have very easy inspire condition, especially with a certain card we'll talk about later. But like I said, you throw your guys in enemy territory, you get them inspired, or you just throw Lurking Skaven who's got 2, and then you're threatening Fearless Seekers, you're threatening Horrors in the Dark, you're threatening Sinking Feeling, you're potentially even threatening Making a Statement, and your opponents have to deal with that 2 wound, effectively 2 shield fighter. And yeah, it's lends itself very well to cover. One of people were talking a lot early on in Harrow Deep about how cover is bad for objectives, and like to an extent I agree, because if you're trying to do things like we were doing in Harrow Deep, where in Beastgrave, where it was hidden purpose, temporary victory, what's the swift capture, where it was, I just run onto things and I score. I walk onto this and I score too. You can't really do that anymore, but kind of the ability to move on to a flipped objective, get the defensive bonus, which is great, and then be like, all right, now I'm going to flip it and score something. Now I'm going to flip it back. Now I'm going to flip it at the end of the round and have it, and you have to think about dominant position, or, next round I might have fleeting primacy or something like that. And it adds a lot of thinking as to when you want to flip or not flip objectives. But it is I think it does add a overall net positive for decks like this.
I think what I found playing against it is that it meant that you were moving on things. You weren't scoring these as fast as you would have in Beastgrave, but you were presenting a difficult decision to your opponent. They had to think about like what might be in the Skaven player's hand, like what do I have to worry about, and whether or not you even had it or not. I was, when I was playing, I was burning thought cycles, thinking like, okay, like what could it be? It could be this or this. Okay, if it is this, then I need to do it. And all of a sudden I was like, every decision felt really loaded as far as what the potential consequences were. And it forces mistakes because I've got so many possibilities that I'm trying to work my way through. And I think that's one of the strengths of it.
Right. And that's something I talked with Aman about after our game, is just like having a Skaven on even a cover hex, not even a delved objective, just like a gloom hex in enemy territory, is like, it could be nothing, or it could be Fearless Seekers and a 2 glory swing. And that's, that does color your decision making, and especially if you have to make charges and you don't have enough fighters to like realistically deal that damage. The purifiers early on, a lot of damage won. As the game goes on, they get better and better damage, but it can make that early couple rounds really confusing.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And as someone who was playing pure aggro, it was more the problem of like, I can kill the rats, but I can't keep them dead.
And that was kind of the other big idea behind this. I almost, like I said, I designed it almost purely for crushes and rippas, because I thought they were going to be way more prevalent, and there was a good number of both of them at the event. I think a lot of people were planning for them as well. I think all the top 4 were really kind of planning to be counter aggro, or at least like counter meta in some way. But Skaven do it pretty uniquely. You can res anywhere on the map, including the back corner of the enemy board. You can move 5 in the opposite direction of somebody. If you whiff an attack, like you charge in Morgok and you whiff an attack, I'm gone and you're never catching up to me. It's the speed that they offer is, I think, the one thing that keeps when we keep talking about how season 1 is like, no season 1 warband's good. They're all like been power crept and their cards are bad. Like the speed, defense, ease of inspire of Skaven is the one thing that keeps them like really, really competitive compared to modern warbands.
Yeah, I wouldn't have anything bad to say about that. Skaven have some amazing cards, like some of the best, I would actually say. I think some of the
just a handful.
cards,
there's a lot of Drek in there, but
there's some clunkers, but like they've also got some that are just like crazy good.
They have 2 good objectives and the rest are kind of trash, but like power cards, they've got a lot of really sneaky good things, honestly.
Yep.
Yeah, just tons. But so thinking some about, power cards and just sort of the end state of the deck, and you had mentioned some of the things that didn't make it into the deck. Were there any others that felt like they were close to making it in, things that you felt like maybe had a good reason for this meta but just couldn't quite make the cut?
Yeah. So one that I actually brought I actually brought a couple cards with in the deck box and was not sure until I submitted. Hypnotic Buzz. I feel like I may have even performed well. I know I get to the finals and everything, but like I feel like if I had traded out one of the death gambits for Hypnotic Buzz, it may have performed a little smoother because I didn't have many ways to get people off objectives. Yes, I have an in-faction distraction, I have confusion, but outside of those, there's no real good... I have to punch people off objectives. So when you go against somebody else who's trying to do a dominant position type thing, not having that extra push, I think, probably hurt a little bit in the long run. And one of the things is that all these cards, all these Arena Mortis cards have the same trigger. It's when the fighter's taken out of action. It's after an attack action that takes a friendly fighter out of action. So there was a lot of times where I'm holding a good death, but then an enemy kills somebody with Screaming Demise. And I'm like, well, I want the reaction from Screaming Demise.
Oh, you're blocking your own reactions. Yeah.
Yeah. And at that point, I'm like, well, this would have been better as a push because that push could have given me positioning. It could have gotten me on an objective or at least somebody off an objective.
Good point.
And, it's something that I definitely thought about. And maybe if hindsight's 2020, obviously. But it's definitely something that perhaps I should have gone with. The other one was as an upgrade. I'm going to blank on the name and I'm going to have to dig it up. But do either of you know off the top of your head it's the illusion for a minion, or it's an illusion where you get +1 dice in cover, and if you're a minion, you also get
something shadow, right? Is that because he's yeah,
it's something like that. It's when you're in cover, opponents have -1 dice against you. If the fighter is a minion, you also get +1 dice, and all these Skaven nameless minion or rats got the minion keyword.
Oh, wow.
So it's actually really good for them. I didn't take it because I had 3 death cards: Dying Curse, Screaming Demise, and Expendable, and then everything else was just focused on keeping Scritch alive and making him better. But in hindsight, I may have traded out Glory Seeker. Or the one card that doesn't fit into those categories that I have is Extruded Snare. But that's because just giving a target a move token is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
But, kind of going back, like, if you have an illusion that you can throw on Lurking Skaven to make him 3 dodge and cover and enemies have -1 dice against him for a round, like, he's never getting off that objective. Nobody's stopping him, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a good inclusion. I think a couple of the other Skaven, one of the other Skaven players, if not both of them, were probably running it. I'm going to pull up Jimmy's deck here.
Terrifying Shadow is the card that you're looking
yes,
for.
and he does have it.
Jimmy did, yeah. I remember him using it against me.
Yeah.
I know there's also like it's not super prominent. There's a little anti-synergy in Skaven where you can accidentally break it with your own choose cards, and you're heavy on the choose.
Right. That is definitely something to consider. But you figure out the order. You use your choose cards first.
Yep.
And then you throw it on, or you throw it on and then you use your choose card after your opponent's attacked.
Yeah, after you no longer need it. Sure.
But yeah, those are the ones that kind of like just almost didn't make the cut. Everything else was kind of set. I mean, I went for high repetition. I like there to be redundancy in a deck. So I've got like 3 side steps. I've got 3 +1 wounds because I wanted to keep Scritch alive.
Yeah.
I have all, redundancy on the death stuff as well. So,
and I know that redundancy on wounds was a difference in ours because I got Scritch down to 1 wound away, but then he was able to retreat and then continue to resurrect rats in our game 3. And I was like, man, that just the difference of the 1 wound was all the world.
Yeah, and that actually happened a bunch. Just especially even holding on to it, because like you can throw +1 wounds onto any rat. It doesn't have to be Scritch, but like if your opponent tools up and they go, okay, I put great strength on him, I'm 4 damage now, and then you just like pull out gifted bulk or pull out impressive bulk or something like that, it just turns people's plans on their head. And
because you can dump resources into I'm going to have 1 very accurate attack here, and it may be enough to get through your 2 dice on guard in a cover hex, but I probably can't do it twice. Right?
Exactly. And that's the big thing right now is there's a big focus, and actually, I could have a meta discussion on it. There's a lot of focus on one-shotting stuff, and people generally will give up once they can't one-shot a target. It is kind of a psychological thing that I've noticed that, like, even just getting Shadowkeeper on an important target like Scritch or Drepper or something like that, you put a good defensive card on, and the opponent goes, well, I might just not attack him anymore. It's like, well, you could get through, and you could take that risk, and if it goes through, you're in a great spot. That's what Amon did a lot against me. He took those risks and they paid off.
That's how Bonar dies.
But
you were like, I guess I'm just going to try anyway. And I'm like, no, you got him. Damn it.
Yeah, but I'm sure you've noticed as well, there's definitely a lot of people who just go, it's not worth it. And then you get to do whatever you feel like. So I think that's something that definitely comes up as well.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I had to learn that lesson in our practice matches, that it was like, if there is an important target that needs to die, you just keep throwing stuff at it until it's dead.
Make sure it dies.
Because the times I would leave Bahonar alone, I lost embarrassingly.
So
he's a little scary once he gets powered up.
Yeah. One of the areas that I am most interested in when deck building is that the edges, right? Like those are where there's some choices that were like, obviously, like in your case, I'm a Skaven deck and I care about staying on objectives. I'm going to take dominant position. Cool. Mm-hmm. I'm a Skaven deck and there's a card called Carnivore's Hall. I'm going to take Moment of Glory. Like those are obvious choices. We talked some about like the edge cases, like what cards almost made the cut and what cards made the cut but almost didn't. But the other spot, just other than cards in general, is restricted, right? So trying to decide what your 3 restricted are, you're making that same decision set. By my count, I think everything to prove scant resources and expendable are your restricted in this?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Were those kind of locked in right from the start, or were there other restricteds that you're like, man, I wish I could, I might go for this if I can cut one of my 3?
Expendable was kind of locked in from the start because that was the theme of the deck, right? Is let stuff die. And expendable just in general is a very strong card because of the way it makes your opponent react. Scant resources, I used to, when it first went on the restricted list, I used to just think it was going to be dead and no one was going to play it anymore. But unless you're playing against specifically people who can't hold objectives, if you're playing against Soul Raid is big for this, Mollog is big for this, and to an extent, like Thrafnir in Hrothgorn, or Black Powder has a couple that can't hold objectives now. But unless you're playing specifically against those, like, you score scant resources every game.
You do, yeah.
And it's for a 2 glory swing, and I'm going to be on objectives anyway. Like, even if my opponent isn't scoring it for me, because that was the big thing why I got restricted in the first place, is like, you would run it as aggro because your opponents are going to score it for you, right? Like,
right.
Most, like, if they're not playing aggro, they're going to score it, and if they are playing aggro, you can just throw yourself on a cover hex and score it. But now that it's restricted, it's still pretty darn good for hold objective players, just because, like, well, unless they're specifically going out of their way to stop you, and I can kind of counter that with scratching in the shadows and my own pushes and reses and stuff, like, unless they're going specifically out of their way to stop you, you're getting 2 glory every time that's in your hand. So that's kind of locked in for me from the beginning, which left everything to prove. And I didn't want it in my deck because I hate primacy. I think it's my least favorite mechanic that has ever been in Underworlds. I know that's not exactly a spicy take, but I didn't really want it in, but it was another card that was, well, I get glory for dying because everything to prove, and my opponents are probably running primacy anyway, so might as well throw it in there. And then, well, if I'm going to run primacy anyway, that gives me access to fleeting primacy, which is, again, not a great card because being on 3 during the middle of a game is kind of difficult, but also it's kind of my plan as it is, so yeah, I can go for it, like, no big deal. And I ended up scoring fleeting primacy, not every game, but a number of games. So everything to prove is kind of like, it's a restricted card I don't want to run just on principle, but also because, like, I feel like there should be better surges. But I mean, if you've read me post anywhere on Discord, you know that I think the current surge set is just kind
pretty
of terrible.
rough. Yeah,
it's no bueno.
Yeah.
Maybe with Exile Dead, we'll get some new surges, but for now, everything to prove stays in the deck.
Can only hope.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Card pool could use some infusion of new blood right now.
Yeah. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, I've lost my train of thought.
Oh,
so.
sorry. So
it's all right.
Well, but to answer, I guess, to further expand on the question about restricted, before it was everything to prove, it was just contest of equals, because I think that's that's kind of the card. Yeah, that feels like the default restricted card for objectives, like, just across everything. Yeah, there's some factions it's better or worse on, but especially here when you're 2 dice in cover with Lurking or with any other inspired Skaven, especially once you get Shadowkeeper on, like, people throw dice at you and you throw it back, and you've got a pretty good chance of matching their dice. Even if I'm not making the dice throw, the attacks myself. It's just kind of a consistent card. But then if you're not running everything to prove, you probably don't want to run another primacy card and fleeting primacy. So it kind of got to the point where it's like, well, if I want to trade out everything to prove, I need to get 2 surges to replace it.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And then it was Silver Lining. And I really dislike Silver Lining every time I put in a deck. It's just like, it bricks, or I have to throw it, or I discard it and then I draw 4 objectives in the next round or something like that, and it's just the most frustrating card. So,
and you're a deck that, in general, or in my experience, like, you're not wanting to do a lot of drawing. Like, your activations, I'm getting on objectives, I'm getting on tokens. Like, there's always something for you to do, whether it's bringing somebody back or moving on to those spots. So
exactly. And the other thing about that is, Silver Lining is great when you can afford to keep the upgrades in your hand. And it's something that you don't really explore a lot, because most people are like, I have a glory, I'm going to put great fortitude on. I have a glory, I'm going to put great strength on, right? Like, it's kind of an automatic jump that you do there. But Silver Linings really excels when you're like, okay, I've got 3 upgrades in my hand. Even though I have glory to spend, I'm going to hold these, draw a card, and hopefully draw into another upgrade. And for this deck specifically, well, Dying Curse, Screaming Demise, and Expendable, I want to put those on as soon as possible. The wound upgrades, I want to get those on Scritch as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I can't dilly-dally, letting him get punched while I'm trying to draw cards getting to Silver Lining. So it didn't really, like you said, not a lot of actions available for me to just sit around and draw a card. So it didn't really gel well with the deck.
Yeah. While we're on the subject of your surges, I'm looking at Reckless Swing in here. It feels like almost an outlier, except for the fact that it scores no matter what the dice you roll. Like, so this is basically like a positioning card, and with your speed, is this why it's in here? Because you have such speed that you can spot those opportunities to like, yeah, I'll go bomb in, and this. I can afford to send Inspired Hungering in there to just like take a Hail Mary swing. I don't really care if it hits. If it does, cool. If it doesn't, cool. I'm going to score Reckless Swing on it. Is this why it's in there?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of it, a big part of it. Another part of it is, again, the lack of the search pool being very strong. I initially there was like kind of a aggro portion of this where I had some more stuff to go on Scritch, and then I had like Scritch is the greatest. And that was in there before Reckless Swing. And then I was like, this really is not kind of working out. But Reckless Swing, like, surprisingly, it's probably the best search to draw in round one because people deploy clumped up. It's very bad search to get later on because if you're playing against Rippas, if you're playing against Morgok, or really anybody that's leaving their deployment zone at all, in round three, it's almost an unscorable card because they're too spread out for it to ever be scored.
Sure.
But the best thing about it is that you can make it gel with everything else. If your opponent deploys the boards and they have a board where there's two starting hexes near each other, they're probably going to deploy on those. If you're playing a aggro warband anyway, they're going to deploy on the two forward ones. Well, you just put a cover hex in between them. They're probably going to give you turn one because people love giving turn one away. And it generally is the correct idea to give turn one away and have the final activation in round one. Yeah. But if they give you turn one, you charge in between two fighters onto a cover hex. If you get to push one away, great. If you don't get to push one away, whatever. I've scored Reckless Swing. I'm in position for Horrors in the Dark and Fearless Seekers. I'm, maybe I'm holding Omega's Offering. I pop that on Hungering Skaven. Now he's inspired, 2 dice in cover, and if you kill him, I get a glory. Maybe I'm holding everything to prove on top of it. Like, it actually leads into a lot of other things if you get it early on. Like I said, if you get it later, it does kind of suck. But like in round one, I think Reckless Swing might be the strongest surge for that opening round.
Sure.
In the only other one that's better is Moment of Glory if you're also holding Carnivore's All, but that's not you can't really always have that one.
Not always, but when you do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that always kind of feels bad, almost like the games where it's like game one I had Carnivore's All round one, they're like, man, that was crazy. Then like game two I had Carnivore's All round one, and they're like, that's really
Yeah, I can say that it did not feel good.
No.
When it came up in one of my 3 matches against Skaven. But yeah, David, do you have any other questions about the actual deck makeup? I think we've kind of run through most of what went into the deck.
I mean, I know from having listened to Path to Glory that you specifically built towards countering Rippa and Crushes. And the cards that do that especially are Screaming Demise, Extruded Snare, Dying Curse to some extent.
A bit.
But really like even I had a 4-fighter warband when I was playing you. And I remember doing the math on Screaming Demise, and I gained a lot more respect for the card because I remember thinking like, I mean, like if this is on and I lose this fighter late in the round, it doesn't really do anything if they die on the last one. But what it effectively did is it delayed when I wanted to be able to knock a particular fighter out, which then opened the door for other things. Like it made me make a lot of difficult choices. So
it does, because you can, there is this kind of gut reaction where you're like, oh, well, I'll just leave them to last. That's no big deal. But leaving them to last means that guy that's sitting on an objective is now going to score me Horrors in the Dark. He's going to score me Fleeting Primacy, potentially. He might even score me Prize Beyond Measure, which happened a couple times when I stacked up on a Lurking Skaven.
Yeah.
And then, of course, end phase stuff. Like if you miss that final attack,
right.
A big thing about that is you leave it to last. Well, now you're all on one attack. If you swing the first one, like, okay, if I've got a Lurking Skaven on, you miss it round one, or you miss attack one, you go, okay, well, I could just attack again the next time. You leave them to your fourth activation, and now you're dice. You're up to the dice gods.
Yep.
I think the other thing that I found when I was playing against this was that I'd leave the person to last. I'd go to get them dead, kill them, and then realize, oh yeah, it's a reaction.
They don't have to take it.
They don't have to use it. And then they just come back next round. And it was like, this feels so bad.
It does, especially if you're also holding There Are Always More, because like then it's not even a scritch action. You just like you're like, oh, you killed him. I'm not going to react, and I'll just res him right next to you and sidestep back onto that objective. Like
There Are Always More ruined a couple games for me because I was like, all right, great, I got him dead, I'm gonna pick up clean kills, and then last activation or last power step, There Are Always More, I'm gonna drop him in your territory, and I just be like, ugh, you don't even know how much that hurt. It's like a 5 glory swing.
But yeah, nothing else I've got as far as the cards themselves. You want to jump into anything else?
I mean, so speaking to sort of the idea of building this to play against Rippas and Crushes and sort of just the meta, I guess, in general, which we had sort of all diagnosed as being invasion aggro.
Yeah, which, quick aside, I've seen people giving me credit for saying coining invading aggro. I don't think... if you're the person out there who actually coined that phrase, then
please take credit.
I'm not claiming your work. I don't exactly know how that got attributed to me, but
sure, I could dig back in the Discord log somewhere and figure out who it was.
There's someone with good enough search foo, they can figure out who it actually was. But I didn't want to come off as stealing somebody else's. Sure.
We get our voices out to a lot of people without really having to think about it too much, I guess.
Loud voices, not original voices.
There you go.
So, anyway, sorry.
But to think sort of that was the idea of the deck. I guess the two things I was wondering is that, so did it achieve what you wanted it to in that sense? And then also, were there sort of counter meta matchups that you were worried about? Like, was there things where you were like, man, if there's somebody else playing against the meta with this, I could be in big trouble?
Oh, definitely at both counts. I mean, I played Crushes 3 rounds in a row and I 2-0'd. Like, not to say that, like, I'm so much better than these guys, but like, I built the deck to kill Crushes and it did exactly what it was designed to do. And not that I enjoyed playing the same matchup 3 matches in a row, but I was kind of happy to have that ability to test what I've done, what I've created.
Yeah.
But yeah, it performed amicably, and in our testing games beforehand, my testing partner Joe, who came and played Rippas, he was also in the top 16 day 2. But he had choice words about this deck, and I had very good games against him as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it performed just as I kind of expected it to. I think when you know what a metagame is and you have an idea on how to not necessarily like stop it in its tracks, but like throw it off. Because I don't think this is like an unwinnable matchup for Magors. For Crushes, Morgok. I don't think it's an unwinnable match for Rippas, but it is one that like you can't just play the same as you play every other faction. And to that end, I think it worked really well. And probably if we played Crushes versus Skaven, 20 times in a row, like eventually it would kind of balance out towards more of a 50-50 based on, how they react and how they set up and how they, plan their moves ahead and stuff like that. But in context of going into a metagame that wasn't prepared for it, it did what it was meant to do. But yeah, there were definitely things that I was scared to see. I think I probably would have lost immediately if I went against Gerard. That deck was basically designed to kill my deck. Not that he's very good at killing rats or anything, but like, that faction has 2 distractions, and I think he was running Hypnotic Buzz, or maybe he wasn't, but he had a lot of distractions. He also wanted to be on objective, so like, my fear was always other dominant position decks, because not only is Making a Statement probably dead, not only is Sinking Feeling, maybe not dead, but probably dead. Lengthening Shadows is much harder because a lot of those decks are content to sit in their territory, which also makes Horrors in the Dark harder because they're probably sitting on their own cover hexes, or at least trying to get you off them to like contest them and stuff like that. Like Fleeting Primacy is, a no-go in those decks. Like, that's exceedingly hard to score. That was a big part of keeping Scant Resources as a restricted card, is that you have to think like, okay, what if I go into somebody else who wants to hold objectives? Well, dominant position's up in the air because it depends on objective setup. It depends on dice and draws and who gets where first and who has which cards to push you off and push you back on. But Scant Resources, if they're playing dominant position, you're always scoring it. Granted, they're probably also scoring Scant Resources, but like, you are keeping that parity in glory to kind of get there. But I do think that if I was going against somebody who was stronger in the hold objective game, and I do think Harrows are stronger at it in general, and to an extent, I do think Davies Purifiers were better at it in general because they have some of those faction cards which are really good. You have 2 ranged fighters that can kind of sit in your territory and turret off when I come into it to try to score Horrors in the Dark or something like that, and just kind of like blast off anybody that I res in your backfield. Like, anybody who wants to squat in their territory and do stuff would have been a very difficult matchup. I think I wasn't really too worried about it because, again, metagame and like the stuff that would have been very, very scary to see, like Thorns, who can just one action get on 5 different tokens and just completely blank me out of a lot of my be an enemy territory holding things. Like, nobody's playing Thorns. I think there maybe was 1 Thorn player near the bottom tables there. Nobody's playing Gloomspike Gits. Nobody's playing, well, people were playing Skeletons for an extent, but they didn't make a huge showing at Adepticon. So, I think there were some bad matchups available to me, but I kind of had a plan to deal with it. I mean, even in those bad matchups, you can always default to, all right, well, I'm going to get great strength and Shadowkeeper on Scritch, and I'm going to put him on a cover hex in the middle of the board, and he's just going to stab everybody who comes close.
Yeah.
Which is because a lot of those decks that you play against are 2 wound fighters, 3 wound fighters, 1 dodge, maybe 2 dodge if they're lucky. So, so there were plans against it. I think if I had gone up against those, I would not have gotten nearly as far. And that's kind of like, that's part of Underworlds in a nutshell, right? Is like,
absolutely,
it's not just luck in a game. You also have to get luck in your matchups. And if I hadn't faced 3 crushes in a row, and I had faced, both other Skaven players and like the Kainan's Reapers player, in, Davey in day 1, like, there's a good chance I didn't get nearly as far as I did and get seeded as well as I did in day 2, even if I did make it. So yeah, I mean, that's just part of the game, I think.
Sure.
Definitely agree.
Yeah, I mean, not to belabor that too much, but it's a game about mitigating risk, or risk management. You're saying like, this is the play. I'm good with this play as long as they don't succeed on hitting Scritch, and they, I've stacked enough stuff that it's only a 27% they're going to hit them, or whatever the case may be. I'm just throwing out random numbers. In the same way, what I'm hearing is that you were doing the same thing with the meta. You're saying like I'm going to set this up where I'm in trouble if I hit multiple times against, like you said, the Spiteclaw mirror or Gloomspite or whatever the case may be. but the chances of that happening are pretty low. So I'm going to mitigate risk and say, I'm in a bad spot, but it's only going to come up 18% of the time, or whatever the case may be. So that's like it's the matchup version of the on the table risk management, risk mitigation.
Exactly. And I think that's definitely something you have to plan for when you start to take events more seriously. If there's any listeners who are like, you're starting to think about going to tournaments, or, you see maybe some of the US Opens are going to add Underworlds, maybe, fingers crossed, or you think about going to Nova or something like that. Like, you can't plan for everything. You just kind of have to plan for what you think is going to happen and what you think has the highest percent chance of happening. If you try to plan for, there's like 36, 37 factions in the game now. There's a lot.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
And if you try to plan for every single one of them, and then like, oh well, these such and such faction also has 3 different play styles I can go, depending on what kind of cards they bring. Like, you're never going to get there. But if you just concentrate on the things you expect to see, that is the type of metagaming that can get you further than you might have gotten otherwise.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a good tip to end on. I am curious if are you brewing up anything else right now? I know you said you're taking a break from Underworlds for a little while, but
I was taking a break on the hobby side. I've signed up for this new league. I'm kind of torn. I've been playing a lot of Soul Raid. I think they're a really good warband. Surprised we only saw one of them at Adepticon. Shout out to Alex, who rocked them and did really well with them as well. But also, they're just kind of fit my play style. I like more technical things. I don't like just playing straight aggro. I like things that kind of have like little tricks and tidbits and special abilities and stuff like that. And Soul Raid is definitely scratching that itch. But after my discussion, I was discussing a little bit last week with Amon and then with a couple other people about whether Kainan's Reapers are a good warband or not, because that seems to be a very divisive topic in the community, whether they're a good warband or actually just terrible. And I'm like, maybe I'll try to make them work. They're interesting. They have, I think, a relatively deep play style compared to some of the other swarmy warbands. So, I've got a couple decks brewing. I'm going to see how it goes. I'm going to try to get some practice games in. But it might not be Skaven for a while. I think I've pushed that one to the extreme, and I'm ready to try something else.
Fair.
Take a dip in somewhere else.
Yeah.
That specific thing you talk about, Kainan's Reapers being a divisive warband. Baconborne has his blog, Determined Effort. And if I remember, I'll throw a link into that where it discusses that very question here. It's like, what's going on here? Why is this such a divisive warband? I thought that was an interesting read. So,
yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, that was a wonderful discussion of all these juicy ideas. Hopefully got some thoughts flowing for folks out there. Always lovely to see old Shadespire stuff kicking around, still doing work.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to throw in, I guess, just popped in my head here is, we talked a lot about how this deck was constructed and what it was constructed for and how it works and all that sort of thing. But I don't think you can say enough about getting the reps in. And I think the sign to me that you had got the reps in on this deck was you played Carnivores all, and it meant that I had the chance to give hunger counters to my folks. And I was like, no, I don't care about that. Why would I do that? And then later when I threw out Ferocious Blow, that is a card I've always used for +1 damage. It'll give you cleave if you got hunger on you. And after that game, you're like, hey, you could have had cleave on that. And I was like, oh my God. Like,
I could have.
I'm like, and that was a moment where I was like, there's someone who's played this deck enough times that he knows, like, what things what things you're giving your opponent.
And when you're relying on Shadowkeeper to keep a Grich or even just somebody on an objective safe, like that does make a difference.
Yeah, sure does.
For sure.
So,
man, yeah. I mean, so I know we talked about it a lot in our prep. I think we way back for the 2019 prep episode we talked about this some, but like there's knowing your warband and there's knowing the field, but then there's just like reps, muscle memory, skill, like there's just the extra, like that 10% that you add on top after you've like memorized the deck, memorized the field that you're probably going to see. It's like, all right, you know the things. Now you got to actually go past the test, right? So
yeah, the biggest part of that I find is reaction windows, because it's one of the reasons I didn't bring Soul Raid. Crab reaction, fish token reaction, like forget it every single time. But in this one specifically, like there were times even at Adepticon where I was like, oh wait, I also have Dark Sacrifice when this guy dies, because they'll die with Omega's Offering, which is not a reaction. You have to remember, like, I can do a reaction off that, but I can't do a reaction other times. And then I also have like Shadowkeeper as a reaction, which is very silly. But like reaction windows, I think getting the reps with your deck to know when the card's played so you're not throwing off the flow of the game. Right. Because I think most people are relatively courteous enough to just be like, oh yeah, let's step back, you can take that reaction, no big deal, whatever. But like I think people are well within the rights to be like, hey man, we passed that reaction window, you can't do that anymore. Like if somebody did that to me, I'd totally be 100% on board with that. So I think so, knowing that as a player and knowing that about your deck, when to take those reactions, when to like keep that in mind, knowing what cards in your hand, and like when that card should come out or can come out even is a huge determiner.
Sure.
Absolutely. Some great last minute tips there. Any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
I mean, this is almost a nothing, but like one thing I actually get out of reps is like just recognizing the art, right? Because you don't want to read your cards early on. When I play a deck, I'll be like, I'll misplay because I just see the art and I think it's a different card. Like my brain will shortcut and I'll think, oh, I'm holding this other thing. I don't know, like. And so enough reps where you just like, all you got to do is see the picture. You're like, okay, I'm holding, Horrors in the Dark. There's some some backlit dudes with red light behind them. I got Horrors in the Dark in my hand. Whatever the case may be. It's silly, but I notice a reduced number of misplays the deeper I get with reps, and it's because I stop mistaking art for one for the other. But,
well,
it seems silly and small, but yeah, I definitely agree with that.
I noticed that I do that a lot more in Vassal, where it's way too small for me to read the cards. Where I have to know what they are without reading them, and then I'm like, wait a minute, what cards are in my hand? But slight digression. Does it help, Davey, for you to know the flavor text on your cards? Because I know you're a fan.
I am a fan, and spoiler alert, I think starting next episode we may have a new segment, which is a flavor text quiz.
Hopefully folks have been paying attention to their cards. Although I feel like our listeners do pay attention very well, because I feel like every time we have these kinds of quizzes, people always come up with great answers. And then we're like, we actually have to go check and see if that's right. And there always are. But yeah. All right. Well, I think we are starting to digress a bit here. So I think we can wrap things up. If you've liked this episode, if you want to just let us know about anything that you thought of while you were listening, or anything that you've got brewing, you can reach us at WTHcast on Twitter, or whatthehexcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to check out any of the other content that we have about the Age of Sigmar universe, you can head on over to themortalrealms.com. We will have a link to our upcoming event on May 1st. We're going to be running a Rivals Plus event, as we had mentioned. That will also be on the mortalrealms.com, but we will have a link to it here in the show notes if you'd like to just quick jump over there without having to go look for anything. Coming up next, hopefully we will have some sort of announcements to talk about. It seems imminent, but who knows? They might just keep teasing us.
Barring that, maybe a dive into the new Maze Breachers.
Yeah, Maze Breachers. We can even test it out, seeing as how we've got this Rivals Plus thing coming up.
For sure.
So yeah, a little bit of Rivals Plus we could talk about there. Otherwise, I think we just have some recommended listening for folks.
Yeah, we're going to go with, I thought about Ball of Confusion because of how brutal that card was to me, but I'll go with Rats Get Fat, and that's a Hill Country Devil song. It's real good. We'll have the link to that in the show notes as always.
All right. It's a good one to go check out. For What the Hex, I've been Phil.
I've been Davey.
And I've been Zach.
I was a digression machine right at the end there.
We were just like further and further off track. It's like, all right, well, I mean, it's fun, but we are way off topic.
It feels like you're editing, man. So
yeah, I mean, I
do whatever you want to do.
I can keep hanging out, but I don't know how much this.
That's what you get when you have a good conversation, man. You just want to keep going.
Yeah.
All that interstitial that stays in, and honestly, I listen to it, I'm like, actually, it's totally fine. We could probably save myself a lot of work by not doing all the editing that I do.
Oh man. If you tell Aaron that you're going to do that, you can also save yourself a lot of work.
Because he'll start editing instead for me.
I think so. That'd be my guess anyway. He'd be like, no.
He'd have an aneurysm. This will not stand. Well, Zach, I sent you kind of a list of questions, and we'll just keep it pretty fluid here. We'll make sure, Phil, you got a copy of the deck up in front of you.
I do not have it pulled up, but I am sure I could find a copy of it very easily.
Little Underworlds DB for all your tournament deck needs.
Yeah.
How's it feel to have a deck up on there? Actually, do you already have one on there from online events? Or